Texting mistakes that kill attraction. Have you ever wondered why someone who was once excited to talk to you suddenly starts pulling away? The conversations dry up, the energy fades, and you're left staring at your phone, questioning everything. It's not always because they've changed. It's often because of subtle mistakes we make without even realizing it. In today's video, we're diving into the truth behind texting mistakes that kill attraction. And what you'll hear could completely change how you connect with someone. This isn't about playing games or chasing attention. It's about learning the kind of emotional presence, clarity, and confidence that builds real desire. If you've ever been ghosted, breadcrumbed, or just felt like you're always the one trying harder, this message is for you. Stick with me to the very end, because by the time we're done, you'll not only understand what's been going wrong, but you'll walk away with the power to shift it, starting today. This could be the turning point your relationships have been waiting for. Overtexting and clinginess may not seem like a serious issue on the surface, but in the world of relationships, it's one of the fastest ways to kill attraction, quietly and completely. In the beginning of a romantic connection, people are often excited, curious, and emotionally open. That first phase is driven by mystery and healthy distance, which keeps the energy alive. But when one person begins to flood the other with constant messages, non-stop check-ins, and an unspoken expectation of quick replies, the balance starts to crumble. Attraction isn't about how much attention you can give someone. It's about how your attention feels when you give it. If it feels forced, pressured, or desperate, it doesn't build intimacy, it builds resistance. The person on the receiving end may initially respond out of politeness or even shared excitement, but if the pattern becomes constant, morning texts, midday updates, endless good nights, multiple "what are you doing" messages throughout the day, then something shifts. It no longer feels like connection. It feels like obligation. The natural desire to talk to someone turns into an invisible pressure to maintain a pace that isn't sustainable. And pressure is the opposite of passion. True connection allows for space, breath, and independence. Clinginess erases that space. People who overtext often don't do it from a place of manipulation. They do it from anxiety. They fear that silence means loss, that a delayed reply signals disinterest. So they try to keep the energy alive by constantly reigniting the conversation. But that's not how attraction works. It thrives when both people have time to live their separate lives and then return to each other with something meaningful to say. When one person tries to fill every quiet moment with a text, they actually remove the very thing they're trying to build. Longing, mystery, desire. These don't grow in a relationship that feels like emotional suffocation. Overtexting can also reflect a lack of self-trust. It shows that your confidence may be tied too closely to someone else's availability. You begin to measure your worth by how often they reply, how quickly they respond, how long they stay in conversation. And that mindset is dangerous because the moment you start chasing reassurance from another person, you hand them the emotional power. You no longer walk in your worth. You wait on their words to validate you. That energy is not attractive. It doesn't invite someone in. It pushes them away, no matter how good your intentions were. On a deeper level, overtexting can signal that you're trying to control the flow of the relationship. When you keep initiating, you're trying to keep the momentum moving in your favor. But that ends up backfiring. Attraction grows best when both people contribute effort naturally, not when one person keeps dragging the other into conversation. If someone truly enjoys your company, you won't have to remind them that you exist. You won't have to text them 12 times a day. Their desire to connect will show through mutual effort, but the more you chase, the more they pull away. It's not about playing games. It's about honoring the rhythm of connection. And sometimes that means doing less, not more. Texting without intentionality is one of the most overlooked mistakes in modern relationships, and yet it quietly drains attraction more than most people realize. When you're in the early stages of building a connection with someone, every message you send is either moving you closer together or pulling you further apart. And the messages that fall into the trap of lazy, unintentional communication do something even worse. They leave the other person feeling indifferent. In other words, they don't make the person feel anything at all. And in a relationship, emotional flatlines are the beginning of the end. When someone constantly sends random texts like, hey, wide, or meaningless updates with no direction, it becomes white noise in the relationship. These texts don't offer anything of value. They don't express real curiosity, care, or excitement. They don't give the other person something to emotionally respond to. Over time, they begin to associate your messages with boredom rather than connection. People want to feel pursued not just through attention, but through intention. They want to feel that when you reach out, it's because you actually care about the conversation, not just because you're trying to kill time or hold on to their attention. Meaningful communication is built on effort. It's not about writing essays or crafting perfect lines, but it's about being present in the interaction, a simple message that shows you were paying attention, that references a past conversation, that asks a thoughtful question or shares something you genuinely want them to know. These are the kinds of messages that feel good to receive. They show that you're not just texting out of habit, but because you're emotionally invested in the person. The problem with unintentional texting is that it becomes repetitive and predictable. Once the other person feels like they know exactly what kind of empty message is coming next, they mentally check out. The spark begins to die, not because of conflict, but because of boredom. Attraction needs surprise, curiosity, playfulness. It needs moments that feel personal and real. That doesn't happen when messages feel like they're copied and pasted to 10 other people, or worse, sent just to avoid being forgotten. People don't want to be a pit stop for your loneliness. They want to be seen, heard, and chosen. Unintentional texting also has a deeper issue. It usually reflects that the sender doesn't have a strong inner life. If all your messages are based on needing someone else to fill your time or distract you, it starts to feel like you're leaning too heavily on them for emotional stimulation. That's a burden, not a bond. On the other hand, when you're living a full life, when you have passions, goals, interesting thoughts, you naturally have more to say. Your texts become a reflection of your energy, not a replacement for it. And that's magnetic. It shows that you bring something to the relationship beyond attention. You bring inspiration, depth, perspective. People remember how you made them feel more than what you said. So if your texts don't make them feel anything, or worse, make them feel like you're just going through the motions, attraction starts to fade. And once it fades, it's very hard to reignite without real change. That's why it's so important to pause before you send that next message. Ask yourself, does this add something? Does this message invite conversation or connection, or is it just noise? You don't need to be perfect, you just need to be present. Thoughtful. A little intentionality goes a long way when it comes to keeping attraction alive and building something worth holding on to. Trying too hard to impress over text might come from good intentions, but it often has the opposite effect of what you're hoping for. It kills attraction. In the beginning stages of getting to know someone, we all want to show our best selves. But when you start performing instead of connecting, the person on the other end doesn't feel your authenticity, they feel your effort. Attraction isn't born from trying to be perfect, it's born from being real. When someone receives message after message that feels rehearsed, overly complimenting, filled with emojis, exaggeration, or constant approval seeking, they start to wonder who you're really trying to convince, them or yourself. Trying too hard looks like sending texts that are over the top, where every sentence seems to scream, "Please like me." It looks like complimenting every detail of their appearance before you even know anything about who they are. It looks like trying to be too funny, using lines you think will impress, but that don't actually reflect how you really talk. It looks like bragging in subtle ways, constantly mentioning your accomplishments or showing off to spark admiration. None of these things feel natural, and people are drawn to those who feel relaxed in their own skin, not those who are desperately trying to be liked. The more you try to impress someone, the more you accidentally put them on a pedestal. That dynamic creates imbalance in the conversation. It's no longer two equals getting to know each other. It becomes one person performing and the other evaluating. And valuation is the death of connection. Instead of building chemistry, you're setting up an unspoken power game, and the person on the receiving end feels it. They may not consciously realize it, but they start to emotionally withdraw because something doesn't feel grounded or secure. Real attraction comes from emotional safety and playful curiosity, not pressure to validate someone else's worth. People are intuitive. Even through a screen, they can feel when you're trying too hard. It shows up in how often you double text, how quickly you reply after every message, how many compliments you give without receiving any back. It shows up in over-explaining yourself, in needing to keep the conversation going, even when there's a natural pause. All of this communicates one message. You're afraid of losing their attention, and fear is never attractive. Confidence is. Confidence doesn't need to chase or convince. It trusts that what you bring to the table is enough. It doesn't try to be interesting, it just is. The irony is that the more you try to impress, the less impressive you become, because the magic in connection isn't in what you say, it's in how you make the other person feel. And nothing makes someone feel more drawn to you than honesty, ease, and emotional presence. When your texts come from a place of calm interest instead of anxiety, they land better. They invite curiosity, they spark mutual respect. You don't need to prove anything, you just need to show up as yourself consistently and with clarity. Trying too hard also leaves you exhausted. You constantly worry about saying the perfect thing, getting the perfect reaction, maintaining the perfect image. But relationships aren't sustained through image. They're sustained through honesty, shared values, and emotional availability. If you start off with a mask, sooner or later it will slip. And by then the attraction might be gone, not because of who you are, but because you never gave them the chance to see who you are in the first place. So stop performing, start connecting. That's how real attraction grows. Dry or delayed responses are often misunderstood as subtle forms of detachment or disinterest, but in reality, they carry a much deeper emotional message to the person on the receiving end. In a world where communication is instant and constant, the energy we put into our replies is a direct reflection of our interest, attention, and emotional availability. When you consistently take too long to reply or respond with one-word messages like hey, cur, or cool, you aren't just being casual, you're signaling to the other person that they don't really matter. And when someone starts to feel unimportant, attraction doesn't just fade, it evaporates. What makes a conversation feel alive isn't how often you text, but how engaged you are when you do. People don't expect you to be glued to your phone, but they do expect a level of consistency and interest if the connection truly means something to you. When you delay responses repeatedly without a real reason, or you respond with dry, emotionless replies, the energy of the relationship begins to die. It sends the message that you're not emotionally invested, that this conversation is a chore, or that you're entertaining someone else who excites you more. And while that may not always be the case, perception is powerful. Once someone feels they're not a priority, their desire to stay emotionally open to you starts to shut down. Dry responses don't just feel like rejection, they feel like emotional silence. They make the other person feel awkward, unsure, and increasingly insecure about where they stand. They begin to question themselves. Did I say something wrong? Am I being too much? Are they even into this? And that internal questioning creates anxiety. The sad part is that sometimes people use dry or delayed responses to seem cool, detached, or mysterious. They've bought into the belief that being emotionally distant makes them more attractive. But the truth is, coldness doesn't build desire, it builds walls. What makes someone want you is not how indifferent you can act, but how emotionally safe and valued they feel around you. Attraction is built in the details. It's in how quickly you respond when they share something vulnerable. It's in how engaged you are in conversation. It's in your tone, your emojis, your punctuation, and even the way you follow up on something they told you earlier. Dry responses suck all that color and warmth out of the conversation. They turn what could be emotional connection into flat, awkward exchanges. Over time, the other person stops reaching out. They stop trying to connect because no one wants to feel like they're dragging energy out of someone who doesn't want to give it. Delayed responses can be equally damaging when they're not explained. Life gets busy, everyone understands that, but when someone regularly takes hours or even days to respond without context, it creates distance and doubt. Consistency is attractive. When you go missing in action over and over, it says that communication with this person is unpredictable, unreliable, and emotionally empty. That creates tension instead of chemistry. You don't have to be available 24/7, but you do have to be present when you choose to engage. Presence isn't about speed, it's about intention. A message that comes a little late but is thoughtful and warm can still build connection, but a message that comes late and cold, that kills it every time. The truth is, no one wants to beg for attention. We're all drawn to people who make us feel wanted and understood. So, the next time you're tempted to send a lazy okay or leave someone hanging for days, remember that every response is an opportunity to connect, to build trust, to deepen attraction. And when you waste that opportunity enough times, it doesn't matter how strong the chemistry once was, that connection will fade quietly and permanently. Avoiding direct communication through texting is one of the most damaging patterns that quietly eats away at trust and attraction. In the beginning of a connection, communication is everything. It's not just about what you say, but how clear, honest, and intentional you are when you say it. When people begin to use texting as a shield to avoid real conversations, hard truths, or emotional vulnerability, they're not preserving attraction, they're sabotaging it. What makes someone feel safe and drawn to you isn't how mysterious or unreadable you are, but how clearly they can feel where they stand with you. The moment your messages start sending mixed signals, leaving questions hanging, or dodging emotional depth, the attraction starts to feel risky instead of rewarding. Texting should be a tool for connection, not a playground for mind games. When someone sends vague responses, avoids answering real questions, flirts with ambiguity, or disappears when things get even slightly emotional, it doesn't make them look strong or independent, it makes them look unreliable. And when a person doesn't know where they stand with you, their heart goes into defense mode. They stop opening up. They stop leaning in. They start reading into every word, every pause, every silence. And once someone starts second guessing the connection, it takes twice as much effort to restore the trust. Avoiding direct communication is often rooted in fear. Fear of confrontation, fear of rejection, fear of emotional discomfort. So people hide behind casual texts, shallow conversations, and meaningless jokes instead of saying what's real. But what they don't realize is that silence speaks too. Avoidance sends a loud message. I don't care enough to be clear. And that message cuts deeper than rejection, because rejection gives closure. Avoidance leaves someone stuck in emotional limbo, waiting for clarity that never comes. That emotional confusion creates distance faster than any argument ever could. One of the most damaging things people do through texting is using it to end or shift the tone of a relationship without ever explaining themselves. They start to pull back, text less, give shorter answers, act colder, all without saying what's changed. They think this approach is kinder or easier than being direct, but silence hurts more than honesty. People deserve the dignity of truth. They deserve to know if you're losing interest, if your feelings have shifted, or if you're no longer available to connect. Direct communication shows respect. Indirect patterns create resentment. The truth is, no one likes to feel like they're playing detective in their own relationship. If every message feels like a puzzle or a riddle, the other person starts to feel exhausted. Communication becomes a burden instead of a bridge. That exhaustion eventually leads to withdrawal. Not because they didn't care, but because they couldn't keep chasing clarity. Healthy attraction needs emotional safety. And that can only happen when both people are willing to be direct, honest, and clear with their intentions. Being direct doesn't mean being harsh or overly intense. It simply means saying what you feel, what you want, and what you're thinking with kindness and confidence. It means not hiding behind vague words or evasive phrases when something needs to be said. It means giving someone the respect of truth even when it's uncomfortable, because the strongest connections aren't built on perfection. They're built on trust. And trust can't grow where clarity doesn't live. So if you're someone who avoids the hard texts, the honest responses, or the straightforward answers, remember that every time you dodge the truth, you push the connection one step further from real intimacy. Direct communication might feel scary, but it's the foundation of anything worth building. And the people who truly want to connect with you will always respect clarity more than confusion. An attraction in relationships isn't destroyed by grand gestures gone wrong or dramatic fights. It's slowly eroded by the small, silent missteps we make every day in our communication. The way we text, the energy we bring into each message, the clarity or confusion we offer, all of it shapes how someone feels when they interact with us. Over-texting and clinginess suffocate the space needed for desire. Texting without intention breeds boredom instead of connection. Trying too hard to impress strips away authenticity. Dry or delayed responses send signals of disinterest. And avoiding direct communication creates emotional uncertainty that kills trust at its root. All these habits may seem subtle, but together they speak loudly. They tell someone whether they are safe, valued, desired, or not. In a world where attention is cheap and distractions are many, being intentional in how we communicate isn't just attractive, it's rare. And it's that rare, grounded, present kind of connection that creates relationships worth keeping. Thank you for listening with your heart. If you saw even a little of yourself in these words, that's a sign of growth, not guilt. The goal isn't perfection, it's awareness. And from awareness, real change begins. If you're ready to build deeper connections, it starts with the text you send today. Be clear, be kind, be honest, and above all, be present. Thank you for being here. Your time matters, your heart matters, and your effort in love will always be worth it.